Mara Vance first heard her name when the lecture hall had already begun to empty, when cadets were still laughing about someone else's failure, and the instructors pretended not to notice. The wall screens behind the dais still showed the day's ranking charts, bright columns of numbers that always felt less like evaluation and more like a public blade. Mara kept her face neutral, packed her slate, and stayed in her seat until the last footsteps faded into the corridor. Provost Halden waited until the doors sighed shut. He stood with his hands folded behind his back, posture perfect, eyes fixed on Mara as if he had been measuring her since the moment she arrived at the academy. Instructor Yara remained near the console, silent, her gaze angled down at the assignment docket as if she was refusing to meet Mara's eyes. "Cadet Vance," Halden said, his voice calm in the way that made every syllable feel pre-written. "You have been selected for Cooperative Transit Trial 17. Mara did not ask what the trial was. Mara had learned early that questions only gave an audience to cruelty. "Understood, sir," she answered, rising and setting her shoulders the way human recruits were trained to do when something sharp was coming. Halden turned a fraction, and the wall screens changed. A small shuttle schematic appeared. An old model, utilitarian, no luxury, the kind the Academy used when it wanted a team to learn discomfort. Under the schematic was a list of crew slots, and under those slots were names rendered in the angular script of a species that Mara could not read without her translator. Even without the translator, Mara recognized the species marker beside each name, a serrated crescent emblem that made the room feel colder. "Kerai," Mara said before she could stop herself. The word came out quiet, as if saying it too loudly could summon the sound of old battles and broadcasts. Halden's expression did not change. "Correct. Kerai Cadets, exchange cohort, officially integrated, officially cooperative, officially committed to mutual understanding." He let the official words hang for a moment, long enough to sour. "Unofficially, the Kerai have requested a human counterpart for the transit segment." Mara's stomach tightened. The Kerai did not request humans because the Kerai wanted understanding. The Kerai wanted proof that humans could be made small inside Kerai space, inside Kerai rules, inside a box that smelled like metal and recycled air. Mara had seen the clips in the archive, Kerai lines holding under fire, Kerai officers declaring humans biologically unreliable, emotionally unstable, too quick to bond and too quick to betray. The war had ended. The words had not. Instructor Yara finally looked up. "The Academy has accepted the request," she said, and the reluctance in her voice was careful, measured, as if reluctance could protect Mara. "The transit is 14 days. No external support. Standard comm blackout. The shuttle is not armed." Mara kept her eyes on the schematic. The shuttle's HAB module was a single narrow cylinder, bunks stacked like shelves, a galley that could barely be called a galley, and a hygiene unit that offered privacy only through thin partitions. 4 beings in that space would not simply coexist. 4 beings would collide. "What is the objective?" Mara asked. She hated that her voice came out steady, as if she had not heard the subtext in Halden's phrasing, as if she was not already being shoved into a lesson that had nothing to do with flight. Halden's mouth made the smallest movement that could have been a smile if Mara wanted to lie to herself. "Compatibility," Halden said. "Restraint, adaptability, leadership without authority. You have been noted for persistence, Cadet Vance. You have been noted for refusing to break when isolation is applied. This trial will measure if persistence becomes productive." Mara understood. Persistence was only useful if it could serve the Academy's image. If Mara failed, Halden could say humans were fragile. If Mara succeeded, Halden could claim credit for refining a dangerous creature into a useful tool. "Report to Hangar 9 in 2 hours," Halden continued. "Pack standard survival kit. No personal weapons. No personal comms. If you attempt to abort, you will be removed from the program. If you provoke violence, you will be removed from the program. If you defend yourself improperly, Halden paused, and the pause was the cruelty. "You will be removed from the program." Mara tasted metal behind her teeth. "Understood, sir." When Mara left the hall, the corridor lights felt too bright. Cadets who had lingered near the exit suddenly found reasons to look away, as if Mara carried contagion. A few stared openly, the way people stared at a slow disaster that had not happened yet. Mara heard her own boots on the deck plating, heard her own breath, heard the quiet click of her translator implant switching through languages as if it was nervous. She went to her locker, pulled out the standard kit, and packed with the kind of precision that kept the mind from spiraling. Thermal blanket, water purifier, micro-med pack, multi-tool, repair tape, protein rations. She added a small spool of polymer cord and a second set of gloves, not because the list demanded it, but because living with hostile strangers meant expecting the unexpected. In the mirror above the sink, Mara saw a face that looked younger than it felt. Dark hair pulled tight, jaw clenched, eyes trained to give nothing away. Mara practiced the neutral expression again, the one that said nothing could touch her, even though something already had. She remembered a phrase her mother used when Mara was a child and storms rattled the windows. "You cannot choose the wind, but you can choose how you brace your feet." Mara braced her feet. Hangar 9 smelled of fuel and cold steel. The shuttle sat on its cradle like an insect folded into itself, paint scuffed, panel seams showing. An Academy tech moved along the hull with a scanner, not looking up. Near the boarding ramp stood 2 security officers in gray armor, hands resting near stun batons, as if the officers expected the shuttle to erupt before launch. Instructor Yara waited with a slate tucked under her arm. Her face was composed, but her fingers tightened on the slate when Mara approached. "Cadet Vance," Yara said quietly, "your file indicates you do not escalate. Maintain that. The Karai provoke for sport." Mara nodded once. "What do I need to know about the crew?" Yara's gaze flicked toward the ramp. "The Karai assigned to this shuttle are high-performing. Commander Rask holds senior standing in his cohort. Engineer Vorth is known for sabotage in simulations. Navigator Selek is known for winning compliance games." Yara lowered her voice further. "Selek will test you socially. Rask will test you structurally. Vorth will test you mechanically." Mara absorbed the names like weights placed carefully in her hands. "And the Academy expects what outcome?" Yara's eyes hardened. "The Academy expects you to endure. Halden expects you to crack." Yara exhaled once, controlled. "Do not give Halden what he wants." The ramp hissed as it extended. The first Karai emerged from the shuttle's shadow, tall and narrow-shouldered, skin patterned in matte bands like dark stone underwater. His eyes were set wide, reflecting light in a way that always made Mara think of predators in old Earth forests. Commander Rask wore a cadet's uniform altered to fit his frame, seams reinforced, insignia polished. His gaze hit Mara and held, unblinking. "So," Rask said, and the translator rendered his voice into a low, clipped human tone. "The Academy sends its soft sample." Mara did not flinch. Mara met his stare and let her expression remain plain. "Cadet Vance," she said. "Assigned crew." Rask's nostrils flared, a subtle gesture that the translator did not explain. "Assigned nuisance," Rask corrected, and his mouth pulled back slightly, exposing teeth too precise to be comforting. "Do you know how to be quiet, human?" Mara chose each word. "I know how to follow procedure." Rask stepped closer, close enough that Mara could smell something mineral and sharp, like rain on stone. Rask angled his head as if he expected Mara to shrink. Mara did not. Rask's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Mara saw annoyance, not hatred. Annoyance meant Mara was not reacting correctly. That was good. Annoyance meant Mara had stolen the first little victory. Behind Rask, another Karai descended the ramp, heavier in build, hands scarred with old burns and new calluses. Engineer Vorth's gaze darted over Mara's kit bag and lingered at the seams, as if Vorth could judge the quality of Mara's life by the stitching. Vorth made a small sound in his throat, not quite a laugh. "She packed cord," Vorth said to Rask in Kerai, perhaps forgetting that Mara's translator would catch it. "She expects restraints." Mara kept her eyes forward, refusing to glance down at the bag, refusing to justify a simple choice. "Cord is standard," Mara said, and she let the statement sit there, plain and boring. A third figure appeared at the top of the ramp, and even without the translator, Mara recognized the deliberate grace in the movement. Navigator Selek came down slowly, as if Selek was stepping onto a stage, not into a shuttle. Selek's uniform was immaculate, sleeves fitted, collar high. Selek stopped one step above the deck and looked at Mara as if Mara was an unfamiliar tool set on a table. Selek's lips curved in a practiced approximation of friendliness. "Human cadet," Selek said, and the translator gave Selek a smooth, almost musical human voice. "Welcome to inconvenience." Mara's reply came calm. "Glad to be here." Selek blinked once, and the smile tightened. Selek had wanted discomfort. Mara had offered a bland phrase that refused to become a target. Instructor Yara stepped forward. "This shuttle departs in 40 minutes, Yara announced, voice official again. "You will abide by Academy cooperative statutes. All incidents are recorded. All violations are penalized." Yara's eyes met Mara's for a brief moment, and in that brief moment Mara saw apology. Yara stepped back. Rask looked at the security officers, then at Mara. "Enter," Rask ordered, and the word was a test. Rask wanted Mara to obey like a subordinate, not like a teammate. Mara shifted her grip on the bag and walked up the ramp without hurrying, without hesitating. The shuttle's interior hit her like a closed fist. Recycled air, warm circuitry, the faint sour edge of unfamiliar physiology. The corridor was narrow enough that shoulders nearly brushed the walls. The bunks were already claimed. One bunk had a Kerai blanket draped across it like a flag. Another had tools arranged with obsessive precision. The remaining bunk, the lowest, nearest the hygiene unit, had nothing on it at all, as if the absence was intentional. Selek followed Mara inside and pointed with a long finger. "That one is yours," Selek said. "Closest to waste processing. Efficient." Mara set her bag on the bunk without comment. The mattress was thin. The metal frame was cold. Mara ran her hand along the edge and felt a slight vibration. Engine standby, power cycling, the shuttle preparing to leave. Rask entered last, and when the hatch began to seal, the sound was heavy, final. The light strips along the ceiling hummed. The air system shifted. The shuttle became a closed world. Rask stood in the center of the cramped HAB module like a judge. "Listen," Rask said. "This shuttle has a chain of command. Rask commands. Vorth maintains. Selek navigates. Human endures." Mara looked at Rask, then at Vorth, then at Selek. Mara kept her voice even. "The Academy assigned me as crew. I will perform as crew." Selek's smile returned, smaller and sharper. "Crew," Selek echoed, as if tasting the word for weakness. Vorth leaned toward a panel near Mara's bunk, fingers hovering as if Vorth might accidentally flip a setting. "If the human breaks, Rask," Vorth murmured, "space will not miss her." Mara did not respond. Mara focused on the shuttle's small sounds, the click of locking bolts, the distant whine of power distribution, the soft pulse of the environmental system compensating for multiple bodies. Mara let the noises anchor her. Outside, the hangar's launch siren began its low, rising call. The shuttle shuddered as clamps released. Somewhere beyond the hull, an Academy official was watching, waiting for humiliation to unfold on schedule. Mara pressed her palm briefly to the wall beside her bunk, feeling the vibration deepen as the engines engaged. Mara did not pray for kindness. Mara did not hope for friendship. Mara chose her feet, braced against the coming wind, and held her expression steady as the shuttle lifted into the dark. The first hours after launch passed in a brittle silence that felt louder than argument. The shuttle slid into transit with a steady vibration that settled into Mara's bones, a constant reminder that there was no corridor to escape into, no observation deck where distance could soften hostility. Rask occupied the command cradle with rigid control, hands resting near the interface without touching it, posture radiating ownership. Selek drifted near the nav console, eyes half-lidded, fingers occasionally brushing controls with deliberate slowness. Vorth knelt near an open maintenance panel, tools laid out with unsettling care, metal clicking softly against metal as adjustments were made that no one had requested. Mara remained near her bunk, harness clipped, pack stowed beneath the frame. She watched without staring, listened without intruding. The shuttle's systems reported green across the board, engine output smooth, life support stable. The quiet stretched, and Mara understood that this was not peace. This was waiting. The waiting ended with a sound that did not belong. It was not loud. It was a thin, wrong vibration that slid through the deck plating, followed by a sharp tone from the navigation array. Selek straightened instantly, grace evaporating into focus. Rask's hands moved at last, fingers striking the console with clipped precision. "Report," Rask said. Selek's eyes flicked across the scrolling data. "Course variance," Selek answered, voice level but tight. "Minor at first, now accelerating." Rask leaned forward. "Define accelerating." Selek adjusted the display, expanding a vector overlay. "Drift is increasing beyond predicted error. The correction loop is not compensating." Vorth rose from the maintenance panel, head tilting. "Engines are clean," Vorth said. "No thrust imbalance, no obvious sabotage." Vorth's gaze slid toward Mara for a heartbeat, testing. Mara did not react. She stepped closer to the central display, careful to keep her movements slow and non-threatening. "Permission to observe?" she asked. Rask's eyes snapped to her. "Observe," Rask said, sharp. "Do not touch." Mara nodded once and leaned in just enough to read the data stream. The numbers made sense individually. Together, they formed a pattern that itched at the back of her mind. The shuttle was not failing. The shuttle was being misled. "The nav sensors are disagreeing," Mara said after a moment. "Starfix and inertial reference are drifting apart." Selek's jaw tightened. "That is obvious." "The magnitude is not," Mara replied. She kept her voice even. "The drift is too smooth for random error. Something is feeding consistent bias." Rask folded his arms. "Speak clearly, human." Mara met his gaze. "The navigation system is trusting a corrupted input. If the loop keeps correcting against bad data, the shuttle will spiral off course." Silence followed, dense and dangerous. Rask turned back to the console. "Solutions." Selek's fingers flew now, grace replaced by urgency. "Manual recalibration requires external reference," Selek said. "The region is sparse. Stellar density is low." Vorth made a low sound. "The auxiliary sensor mast," Vorth said. "It was struck during docking maneuvers weeks ago. Alignment was within tolerance, but tolerance may no longer be enough." Rask's gaze flicked to Vorth. "Can it be realigned?" Vorth hesitated. "From inside, no. From outside." Vorth's eyes slid again toward Mara, assessing mass, reach, expendability. "An EVA is possible." Rask turned fully toward Mara. "You are light," Rask said. "You are flexible. You will go." Mara did not argue. Arguing would have wasted time and proven nothing. "I will need a tether," Mara said, "and a hard reset on the nav loop while the mast is realigned." Selek frowned. "A hard reset will blind us." "For 8 seconds," Mara said. "After that, the system will accept corrected input." Rask stared at her, measuring risk against pride. The shuttle shuddered again, a subtle but unmistakable yaw. Rask made his decision. "Prepare the human," Rask said. "If she drifts, Cut her loose. Mara's chest tightened at the words, but her face remained still. Vorth moved quickly, retrieving a tether spool and an EVA harness from a storage locker. The equipment was functional but worn, seals scuffed, connectors stiff. Vorth clipped the harness onto Mara with efficient roughness, fingers tugging straps tight. "Do not spin," Vorth muttered. "Do not freeze. Do not damage the mast." Mara met Vorth's eyes. "Keep tension on the tether. 8 seconds of blindness. Count them." Selek moved to the airlock controls, expression unreadable. "The void is not forgiving," Selek said softly. "Humans misjudge silence." Mara did not look away. "So do Kerai," Mara answered, and stepped into the airlock. The hatch sealed with a hollow clang that echoed through the small chamber. The pressure dropped. The suit tightened around her, a firm, enclosing grip. When the outer hatch opened, space spilled in, vast, black, uncaring. The shuttle's hull loomed beside her, scarred and familiar in its angles. The auxiliary sensor mast extended like a thin limb, its tip slightly skewed, alignment just enough off to ruin everything. "Tether secure," Vorth said over the suit link. Mara pushed off gently, keeping her movements controlled. The tether unspooled with a soft mechanical whine. Her boots found purchase against the hull, magnetic locks engaging with a reassuring click. She reached the mast and placed her hands on the adjustment collar, feeling vibration through the metal. "Begin reset on my mark," Mara said. 3, 2, 1, mark. Inside the shuttle, Selek cut the loop. The displays went dark. For a breathless instant, the shuttle was blind. Mara rotated the collar, aligning by feel and by the faint resistance of the mechanism. Her gloves slipped once and her heart spiked, but she corrected, forcing her breathing slow. She thought of nothing except the task. No species, no hatred, just angles and force and time. 6, Vorth counted. 7. "Done," Mara said. "Locking now." 8, Vorth said. Selek restored the loop. Light flooded the displays. The shuttle's vibration smoothed, the yaw easing into alignment. Rask exhaled, a sharp sound that might have been relief. "Data stabilizing," Selek said. "Course recovered." Mara secured the mast and pushed back toward the airlock, tether guiding her home. The hatch sealed. Pressure returned. When Mara stepped back into the HAB module, her suit damp with sweat, the air felt thicker, warmer, alive. No one spoke at first. Rask studied the readouts, confirming stability. Selek stared at the nav display, then at Mara, something uncertain flickering behind Selek's eyes. Vorth unclipped the harness and handed it back without comment. "You performed adequately," Rask said at last. Mara nodded. "The shuttle performed adequately once corrected." Rask's mouth twitched, displeased by the implication but unable to deny it. "Remain ready," Rask said. "This transit is not finished." Mara returned to her bunk and sat, muscles aching, heart finally slowing. She did not smile. She did not claim victory. She simply rested, knowing that something had shifted, not into trust, not into friendship, but into a narrow, fragile space where survival had briefly outweighed pride. The shuttle settled into a wary rhythm after the correction, as if the machine itself understood that complacency would be punished. Power cycles became more frequent, diagnostic pings more insistent. Rask ordered extended checks without explanation, and no one questioned him. Selek recalculated routes again and again, fingers moving with sharp precision, while Vorth prowled the maintenance corridors, opening panels that did not strictly require opening, listening to the shuttle's insides like a hunter pressing an ear to the ground. Mara felt the shift before anyone spoke of it. The hostility had not vanished, but it had changed texture. Insults no longer came immediately. Silence was no longer empty. When Rask gave an order, his eyes flicked to Mara, not with command, but with calculation. When Selek adjusted course, Selek waited half a breath longer than necessary, as if expecting Mara to object. Vorth stopped making comments in Karai that were meant to be overheard. The next failure came without warning and without subtlety. The lights dimmed once, twice, then flared back to full brightness. The environmental system coughed, airflow stuttering. A warning tone sounded from the lower console, deeper and more urgent than before. Vorth was already moving. "Pressure variance in the aft conduit," Vorth said. "Seal integrity compromised." Rask was out of the command cradle in a single motion. "Location." Vorth pointed to the schematic. "Behind the cargo brace. Manual access only." Rask's gaze snapped to Mara. "Human," Rask said. "Explain." Mara stepped to the display, scanning the data. The pressure loss was slow, insidious, bleeding atmosphere into a section that should have been sealed. "Microfracture," Mara said. "Probably stress from the course correction. It will widen." Selek folded his arms. "How long?" "Minutes," Mara answered. "Less if vibration increases." Rask's jaw tightened. "Options." Vorth hesitated. "The conduit can be sealed from inside," Vorth said. "But the brace is jammed. Someone must enter the maintenance crawl space and apply a patch manually. The pressure differential will spike during sealing." Selek's eyes flicked to the crawl space access, then away. "That space is narrow," Selek said. "Karai's shoulders will not fit." Rask did not hesitate. "The human fits." Mara nodded once. "I will need sealant, a clamp, and a backup tether. If the conduit ruptures fully, suction will be violent." Rask's eyes hardened. "If the human fails, the compartment will be vented." Mara met his gaze steadily. "If the conduit fails, venting will happen anyway." For a moment, the shuttle felt balanced on the edge of something sharp. Then Rask inclined his head a fraction. "Proceed." The crawlspace hatch was low and narrow, its edges worn smooth by tools, not bodies. Mara clipped the tether to a fixed anchor and slid inside, pulling the hatch closed behind her. The space beyond was tight enough that her shoulders brushed both sides. Cables ran along the walls like exposed veins, humming softly. The air grew warmer, heavier, carrying the scent of overheated insulation. "Mara," Vorth said over the link. "Pressure is rising. Move." She moved. Crawling was familiar, comforting in its simplicity. Hands forward, knees follow. Keep breathing steady. The conduit came into view, a thick line of reinforced material with a hairline fracture glowing faintly under diagnostic light. Air hissed through it, soft but relentless. Mara positioned herself, bracing her boots against a support strut. She applied the sealant in a smooth, continuous line, fingers steady despite the vibration that had begun to creep into the deck. The shuttle shuddered, and the hiss grew louder. "Pressure spike," Selek said. "You have seconds." Mara reached for the clamp, fingers closing around cold metal. As she tightened it, the fracture widened with a sharp crack. The conduit bulged, sealant stretching, then holding. The suction hit like a punch. Mara's tether snapped taut, wrenching her forward. Her helmet struck the conduit with a dull impact that sent stars across her vision. She tasted copper and forced herself to keep her grip. The clamp slipped. The hiss became a roar. "Hold!" Vorth barked. "Hold!" Mara planted her boots harder, muscles screaming. She adjusted the clamp by feel, tightening until her hands shook. The conduit groaned, then steadied. The roar faded to a whistle, then to silence. For a moment, Mara stayed where she was, forehead pressed against metal, breathing ragged. Her vision cleared slowly. "Seal holding," Vorth said, awe creeping into his voice despite himself. "Pressure stabilizing," Selek confirmed. "Atmosphere secure." Rask did not speak. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Rask said, "Return." Mara crawled back the way she had come, slower now, body protesting every movement. When she emerged into the hab module, Vorth was already there, hands ready to catch her if she stumbled. Selek stood near the console, posture rigid. Rask watched from the center of the compartment, arms folded. Mara unclipped the tether and straightened with visible effort. Her helmet came off, revealing a bruise blooming along her temple. She wiped blood from her lip with the back of her hand and did not comment. Rask's gaze lingered on the bruise. "You did not retreat," Rask said. "There was nowhere to retreat," Mara replied evenly. Selek stepped closer, studying the clamp readout. "The seal will last," Selek said. "Longer than expected." Mara shrugged slightly. "The material tolerances were underestimated." Vorth let out a short, humorless sound. "You risked rupture," Vorth said. "You did not warn." Mara met Vorth's eyes. "If I warned, someone would have ordered abort. The conduit would have failed." Rask's eyes narrowed. "You chose outcome over obedience." "I chose survival," Mara said. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Rask studied her for a long moment, then turned away, returning to the command cradle without further comment. Selek watched him go, then looked back at Mara, expression no longer amused. Later, after the shuttle settled again, after systems stabilized and alarms quieted, Mara sat at her bunk, applying a med patch to her temple. The adhesive pulled slightly, a small grounding pain. She became aware of movement and looked up to see Selek standing nearby. Selek spoke softly. "You knew the risk," Selek said. "You accepted it without negotiation." Mara finished smoothing the patch. "Negotiation wastes time." Selek tilted his head. "Most humans demand acknowledgement." Mara met Selek's gaze. "Most situations do not allow it." Selek studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head in a precise, formal motion. "The crew remains functional because of your action," Selek said. "That fact is recorded." Mara nodded once. "That is enough." When Selek stepped away, Mara exhaled slowly. She felt the ache in her muscles, the deep fatigue that came from holding a line against force. She also felt something else, quieter but unmistakable. The crew no longer saw her as ballast. She was not command. She was not friend. She was something more dangerous to old hatred. She was necessary. The next day cycle began with an odd quiet that felt earned rather than imposed. The shuttle's systems held steady, but the steady state did not bring comfort. Steady state brought time, and time invited old instincts to crawl back into the corners. Mara woke to the soft hum of circulation fans and the faint scrape of Vorth's tools. Her bunk still sat closest to waste processing, still carried that dry chemical tang that never fully vanished, but Mara had stopped noticing it as an insult. Mara noticed it as a reminder. The crew had tried to place her at the lowest point of the shuttle, and the shuttle had not cared. Space had not cared. Only choices mattered. Rask issued the day's maintenance schedule without looking up. "Power routing check," Rask said. "Coolant loop sampling. Hull stress scan." Rask's voice held less of the performance of command now, more of the urgency of keeping a fragile machine alive. Selek pulled up the flight plan and began adjusting window timings for the next star fix. Vorth crawled into the lower service bay, muttering in Karai about alignment tolerances and human luck, as if luck had tightened clamps and sealed fractures. Mara moved through the tasks as quietly as she could, staying useful without forcing presence. She recalibrated a sensor array, verified the emergency oxygen canisters, and ran a manual check on the suit seals. Her bruise ached when she turned her head too fast, a dull pressure under the med patch. Mara welcomed the ache. The ache proved that fear had not won. The problem surfaced during the coolant sampling. The interface displayed a small warning that would have been easy to dismiss, a minor deviation in temperature distribution. Rask dismissed nothing. Rask leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Vorth," Rask called. "Confirm coolant integrity." Vorth's voice came from the service bay. "Coolant is present," Vorth said. "Flow is present. Temperature sensors are inaccurate." Selek's fingers paused above the nav console. "If temperature sensors are inaccurate," Selek said. "The reactor controller will mismanage load." Mara stepped closer, reading the trend lines. The deviation was small but persistent, rising in a pattern that pointed to one specific loop. "One heat exchanger is underperforming," Mara said. "The controller is compensating by increasing load elsewhere. It will cascade." Rask's gaze snapped to her. "How long?" Mara did the math in her head, using the numbers on the display, not trusting instinct alone. 2-day cycles before the controller hits emergency throttle, Mara said. After that, the shuttle will begin shedding non-critical systems. Life support will remain, but stabilization will degrade. Navigation will degrade. Selek's expression tightened. "We cannot lose stabilization during the next fix. That window is narrow." Rask turned toward the service bay hatch. "Vorth," Rask said. "Repair the exchanger." Vorth emerged, hands stained with grease, eyes sharp with irritation. "Repair requires disassembly," Vorth said. "Disassembly requires shutdown. Shutdown requires thermal buffering. Thermal buffering requires—" Vorth's gaze flicked toward Mara, then away, as if the next word tasted wrong. "Human methods. Water mass. Phase change." Rask's eyes narrowed further, not at Mara, but at the idea that a solution might come from her. "Explain," Rask ordered. Mara kept her voice steady. "If the exchanger cannot be repaired without shutdown, the shuttle needs a temporary heat sink," Mara said. "The shuttle does not have spare thermal tiles or redundant exchangers. The shuttle does have water and structural mass. Heat can be moved into water, held there through phase change, then released gradually. It is crude, but it works." Selek's mouth curved in a faint expression that might have been disdain or curiosity. "You propose boiling the drinking reserve," Selek said. "I propose using part of the reserve," Mara corrected. "The purifier can recover vapor. The risk is manageable if controlled." Vorth crossed his arms. "Karai doctrine forbids introducing uncontrolled vapor into a sealed craft," Vorth said. "Condensation causes corrosion." "Uncontrolled vapor is a mistake," Mara said. "Controlled steam is a tool. Steam can be routed through a containment sleeve and condensed deliberately. The sleeve can be made from polymer insulation and spare conduit wrap. The condensate can be captured and purified." Rask stared at the schematic, jaw working. Pride fought necessity in the small movements of his face. Finally, Rask spoke, clipped. "If corrosion occurs, I will hold you accountable." Mara nodded. "Understood." The work began immediately. Vorth cleared space near the galley module, snapping open storage panels and dragging out wrapped spare materials with rough efficiency. Selek rerouted power priorities to keep nav stable during the temporary shutdown window, fingers moving with practiced speed. Rask managed the schedule and kept the crew aligned, issuing orders like a blade, but the blade cut toward the problem now, not toward Mara. Mara built the heat sink as simply as possible. She split a water container into 2 segments, sealed one inside an improvised sleeve, and used insulation wrap to create a crude thermal barrier. She anchored the assembly against a structural brace to prevent shifting during thrust adjustments. Vorth watched closely, not helping at first, eyes tracking every choice as if searching for the flaw that would justify contempt. "Your seal is uneven," Vorth said at last, pointing with a tool. "It is uneven because the material is stretched," Mara said. "If Vorth wants it even, Vorth can cut a fresh strip." Vorth froze for half a breath, surprised by the directness. Then Vorth made a low sound and reached into the storage bin, pulling a new strip of wrap. Vorth cut with precise angles and handed the piece over without another word. The exchange felt small, but Mara felt something loosen in the air, like a knot easing. When the shutdown window arrived, Rask counted down without drama. "Shut down in 10, Rask said. 9, 8. The shuttle's hum lowered as power bled off. The lights dimmed to emergency bands. The temperature in the HAB module shifted, a faint chill as the exchanger stopped doing its work. Vorth moved to the exchanger access and began disassembly with fast, practiced hands. The exposed components glowed faintly with residual heat. Mara monitored the improvised heat sink, watching condensation lines form, guiding vapor into the capture path. Selek kept nav stable on reduced power, jaw clenched, eyes never leaving the drift indicator. A sharp alarm chirped, and the shuttle shuddered. The heat sink assembly trembled against its brace. Mara lunged, catching it before it could slip. Hot vapor hissed through the sleeve, and for an instant her gloves warmed, heat seeping through layers. "Stabilization," Selek snapped. "Micro-jolt." Rask's head turned. "Cause." Selek's eyes widened slightly. "External particulate, minor impact. Hull reports no breach." Vorth did not look up. "Continue," Vorth growled, tightening a coupling. The alarm quieted, but tension stayed. The shuttle felt like a living thing holding its breath. Mara kept her hands on the assembly until the vibration smoothed. Sweat dampened her hairline despite the chill. She forced her breathing slow and counted condensation pulses in her head, giving her mind something to obey. Vorth finally pulled a component free and held it up. A thin, crystalline residue coated the inner channel, clogging flow. Vorth's eyes narrowed. "Contaminant," Vorth said. "From manufacture. Delayed failure." Rask stepped closer, gaze sharp. "Can it be cleared?" Vorth hesitated, and hesitation from Vorth meant the answer was bad. "Clearing is possible," Vorth said. "Time is required. Precision is required. If Vorth slips, the component cracks. If the component cracks, no replacement exists." Mara did not wait for Rask to order sacrifice. Mara stepped in beside Vorth, careful not to crowd. "Mara can hold the housing steady," Mara said. "Vorth can scrape the channel. 2 hands reduce slip." Vorth's eyes flashed. "Do not touch," Rask cut in. "Do it," Rask said. "Both of you." Vorth's jaw tightened, but Vorth shifted position. Mara braced the housing with both hands, locking her elbows, becoming a human vice. Vorth used a thin tool to scrape residue in slow, controlled strokes. The work took long minutes that felt like hours. The shuttle remained on reduced systems. The air grew slightly stale. Selek's fingers hovered over the nav controls, ready to compensate for any drift. Rask stood behind Vorth, silent, watching everything. When the last residue flaked free, Vorth exhaled sharply and slid the component back into place. Vorth sealed the coupling, checked the alignment twice, then once more, as if repetition could erase the indignity of needing help. "Restart," Vorth said. Rask nodded to Selek. "Power up." The shuttle's hum rose again. Lights brightened. Air circulation strengthened. The exchanger began to draw heat, and Mara's improvised sink cooled, vapor flow reducing to a controlled trickle. The condensation capture held. No steam escaped into the cabin. No alarm sounded. Selek stared at the drift line, then let the shoulders lower a fraction. "Navigation stable," Selek said, quieter now. Vorth ran a hand over the exchanger casing, almost tender, then looked at Mara without the usual edge. "The sleeve worked," Vorth admitted, voice rough. "Corrosion risk remains low." Mara nodded once. Mara used sealed routing. No free vapor. Rask looked at the heat sink assembly, then at Mara. For the first time, Rask's expression held something that was not hatred or disdain. It was recognition, reluctant, but real. "Human methods are inefficient," Rask said. Mara waited, saying nothing. Rask continued, the words forced out like a concession taken from a wound. "Human methods are also effective." The statement should have felt like victory. Mara felt only relief, because effective meant alive. Mara began dismantling the heat sink, draining captured condensate into the purifier reservoir. Vorth assisted without being asked, handing clamps, collecting wrap, returning tools to storage with that same obsessive order. Selek remained at the console longer than necessary, watching the numbers settle into stable bands, as if stability itself was a new kind of language. Later, when the shift ended, the HAB module felt less like a cage and more like a workshop where four beings shared the same fragile objective. Rask remained in the command cradle, eyes scanning readouts in silence. Selek sat near the nav console with a ration packet unopened, gaze distant. Vorth cleaned a tool blade with slow strokes. Mara hesitated, then reached into her kit and pulled out a small packet she had kept untouched. A concentrated flavor cube meant to make recycled water taste less like plastic. Mara slid the packet across the narrow table toward Selek. "It helps," Mara said simply. Selek looked at the packet, then at Mara. "A bribe," Selek said. "A tool," Mara replied. "Hydration improves focus." Selek picked up the packet, turning it between slender fingers. After a long moment, Selek nodded once and tucked it into a uniform pocket. "Recorded," Selek said, but the voice lacked mockery. Vorth glanced over, expression unreadable. "Humans share supplies," Vorth said, almost to himself. "Humans share problems," Mara answered. "Supplies follow." Rask spoke without turning. "Do not confuse function with bond," Rask said. Mara kept her voice calm. "Mara does not confuse. Mara builds what keeps the shuttle moving." The shuttle continued to move, silent and steady through the dark. In that steady movement, something else moved as well, slow and hard to name. Hatred still existed, lodged deep in old doctrine, but necessity had carved a narrow channel through it. In that channel, cooperation flowed. Not warm, not friendly, but real. The final approach began with a message that should have meant relief. The rescue beacon lit on the nav display, its signal clean and strong, a precise vector that cut through the dark like a promise. Selek confirmed the match twice, then a third time, fingers steady, voice controlled. "Rendezvous in 4 hours," Selek said. "Academy recovery vessel on standby." The shuttle did not celebrate. The shuttle tightened. Mara felt it in the way Rask straightened, posture hardening back into something ceremonial. Mara saw it in the way Vorth checked a seal that did not need checking, hands lingering longer than necessary. Selek recalculated the approach profile even after the solution converged, eyes flicking between numbers as if one of them might betray the crew at the last moment. Rescue meant witnesses. Rescue meant judgment. Rescue meant that the closed world where survival had mattered more than doctrine was about to be opened and dissected. The first anomaly appeared 90 minutes into the approach. A faint distortion rippled across the sensor array, subtle enough that an inattentive crew might have dismissed it as background interference. Rask did not dismiss anything. "Report," Rask said, voice sharp. Selek adjusted the display, jaw tightening. "Gravitic shear," Selek said. "Localized. Uncharted." Mara stepped closer, scanning the projection. The distortion was asymmetric, pulling harder on one side of the shuttle's projected path. "Tidal pocket," Mara said. "Small, but unstable. The rescue vector passes too close." Rask's eyes narrowed. "The Academy charted this corridor." "The corridor shifted," Mara replied. "Mass distribution changed recently. Debris cluster, perhaps." Vorth made a low sound. "The shuttle's hull will not tolerate prolonged shear," Vorth said. "Microfractures will propagate." Rask turned toward the comm console. "Signal the recovery vessel," Rask ordered. "Request vector adjustment." Selek executed the command. The console chimed once, then again, then fell silent. Selek frowned and rerouted through an auxiliary channel. The result did not change. "No response," Selek said. "The beacon signal is active, but the return channel is dead." The word dead settled heavily in the HAB module. Mara felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained level. "The shear may be interfering with transmission," Mara said. "If the recovery vessel holds position, the shuttle must clear the pocket alone." Rask's jaw worked. Options. Mara studied the map, mind moving through constraints. The shuttle lacked the power to brute force through the distortion. A wide detour would cost time and fuel the shuttle did not have in abundance. A controlled skim is possible, Mara said. If thrust and orientation are managed precisely, the shuttle can ride the edge of the pocket without entering the strongest gradient. Selek shook his head. The margin is thin. Error tolerance is minimal. Vorth crossed his arms. Structural limits will be tested. Rask looked at each of them in turn. Who flies? The question hung between them, heavier than any order Rask had given before. By doctrine, Rask commanded. By habit, Selek navigated. By survival, Mara had solved problems no doctrine accounted for. Mara spoke before the tension could curdle. Selek flies, Mara said. Selek understands the nav response curves. Mara will handle thrust modulation. Rask will command execution timing. Vorth will monitor hull stress and call abort if limits approach failure. Selek's eyes flicked to Mara, searching for manipulation. Finding none, Selek inclined his head once. Agreed, Vorth grunted. Vorth will call abort, Vorth said, without hesitation. Rask studied Mara, then gave a short nod. Proceed. The shuttle altered course, engines adjusting in fine increments. The distortion loomed ahead, invisible to the eye but unmistakable in the way the instruments began to sing with tension. The deck vibrated differently now, a low, uneven pulse that crept up through Mara's boots and into her bones. Approach vector locked, Selek said. Beginning skim. Mara placed her hands on the thrust controls, fingers light, ready. She watched the readouts, not trusting any single number, reading relationships instead. When the shear tugged, Mara compensated with a fractional thrust change, easing the shuttle back into balance. Sweat gathered at her temples, but her breathing stayed even. Stress rising, Vorth warned. Within limits. Rask counted time, voice steady. Hold, hold. The shuttle shuddered as the gradient shifted unexpectedly, the distortion rippling like a living thing. Alarms chirped. Selek corrected course sharply, then eased back as Mara countered with thrust. Too much, Selek snapped. Correcting, Mara answered, already adjusting. For a moment, the shuttle rode the edge perfectly, suspended between pull and release. Then the distortion surged. The deck lurched. A sharp crack echoed through the hull. Vorth swore, hands flying across the diagnostic panel. Microfracture in the dorsal strut, Vorth said. Propagation risk increasing. Abort, Vorth added immediately, without drama. Mara did not hesitate. Reducing thrust, Mara said. Rask, mark timing. Rask's eyes flicked between displays. Now, Rask said. Mara cut thrust and rolled the shuttle, letting inertia carry it along the curvature of the pocket instead of fighting it. Selek adjusted orientation, movements precise despite the violence of the motion. The alarms rose in pitch, then began to quiet as the worst of the shear slipped past. Stress decreasing, Vorth said, relief edging into his voice despite himself. Hull holding. The shuttle emerged into calmer space, engines humming unevenly as systems recalibrated. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Selek exhaled slowly and leaned back from the console. Clear, Selek said. Rask did not respond immediately. Rask stood still, hands braced on the command cradle, eyes fixed on the nav display where the rescue vessel's signal burned steadily, closer now. When Rask finally turned, his gaze rested on Mara. You gave command structure, Rask said. Without claiming command. Mara nodded. Structure prevents chaos. Structure also defines authority, Rask said. Mara met his gaze. Authority must serve survival. The recovery vessel loomed into view an hour later, its hull lights bright and impersonal. Docking clearance came through on a restored channel, crisp and formal. The shuttle latched on with a heavy thud that reverberated through the HAB module. The engines powered down, and with them went the constant vibration that had become the crew's shared heartbeat. As pressure equalized, footsteps echoed beyond the hatch. Academy personnel voices filtered through the metal, professional and distant. The hatch seal disengaged. Before it opened, Rask spoke quietly. "Once the hatch opens, this crew dissolves," Rask said. "Assignments will be reassessed." Selek's mouth tightened. Vorth's hands stilled. Mara looked at the hatch, then back at Rask. "The shuttle functioned because the crew functioned," Mara said. "Records will show that." Rask's eyes flicked to the consoles, to the logged data streams that told a story numbers could not fully capture. "Records can be interpreted," Rask said. The hatch opened. Light spilled in, harsh and white. An Academy officer stepped forward, eyes moving quickly over the cramped interior, over Mara's bunk, over the Karai crew. The officer's gaze paused on Mara, then shifted back to Rask. "Commander Rask," the officer said. "Report." Rask straightened fully. "Transit completed," Rask said. "Course deviations managed. System stabilized. Crew performance effective." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Effective under strain." "Yes," Rask said. "Effective because of strain." The officer glanced at Mara again. "Cadet Vance," the officer said. "Your assignment concludes here." Mara nodded. "Understood." As the officer turned to issue further instructions, Rask spoke again, louder now. "Request amendment," Rask said. The officer paused. "State request." Rask's jaw tightened, pride and doctrine grinding against something newly forged. "This crew requests to remain intact for subsequent operations," Rask said. "Under Human Cadet Vance as coordinating lead." The words landed like a shockwave. The officer stared. "Explain." Rask did not look at Mara when he spoke. Human Cadet Vance demonstrated consistent prioritization of crew survival over personal standing, Rask said. Human Cadet Vance integrated Karai methods without dominance. Loyalty was not demanded. Loyalty formed. Selek stepped forward, formal posture precise. "Navigator Selek supports the request," Selek said. "Operational efficiency increased under this structure." Vorth inclined his head, rough but sincere. "Engineer Vorth supports the request," Vorth said. "The human keeps the shuttle alive." The officer looked at Mara, something like disbelief flickering across the officer's face. "Cadet Vance," the officer said, "do you accept responsibility for this crew?" Mara felt the weight of the moment settle, heavy and real. Mara thought of the crawl space, the heat sink, the edge of the gravitic pocket. Mara thought of how survival had narrowed differences until only function remained. "Yes," Mara said. "Mara accepts." The officer exhaled slowly, then nodded. "The request will be reviewed," the officer said. "Remain available." As the officer turned away, Rask finally looked at Mara. The hatred that had once lived openly in Rask's eyes was gone. In its place stood something harder, quieter, and far more dangerous to old certainties. "Do not mistake this," Rask said. "Loyalty was earned in crisis." Mara held his gaze. "That is the only kind that lasts." The recovery vessel hummed around them, vast and indifferent. The shuttle